off, as discussed, a little intro into the community. The Product Folks is a volunteer-driven community of product managers, product enthusiasts, marketers, designers, everyone who's interested in building and growing online products, software, hardware, anything that's in the intersection. Um, we started about a year ago, primarily getting the community together offline. We've grown into a bunch of initiatives, learnpmwith.me, which is an online curated set of resources for people looking to upskill into PM. We have Insurjo.club, which is an early stage APM program. We're starting off with a new initiative called the Product Study Club, which is curated set where essentially meet interesting set of people and grow together. So it's an accountability group. Um, and a very new initiative which we launched last week called the 100 PMs, which is bringing to spotlight um, interesting people in the ecosystem. So if you guys have mentors who've helped you, you have senior folks on your team who you're working with, if you would like to give them a shout out, we'll be sharing that link in the comment section as well. So please do help us nominate more folks in the industry. With that, moving on to our speakers profile for today. Hi Akash, welcome once again to this session with TPF.
Hey, thanks.
Awesome. So, giving you all a brief intro into Akash's profile, he's currently the SVP of growth at Hotstar. He's also a very active angel investor, so you guys could have some questions around that for him in the Q&A section. He's earlier worked with Housing.com as the chief strategy officer, and he's also a founder of a company in the past. So, any questions that you guys have from Housing.com was very famous, and it's actually changed the design landscape in India, if that is one thing that I could point out. So a lot of insights there. With that intro, I think over to you, Akash. Would love to hear something more around experimentation framework from your past roles and anything that you think might help all of us learn from. Over
Yep.
to you.
Thanks. I think before I begin, I think Suhas has been, and the team, the entire team at TPF has been doing a stellar job at giving shape to this community. I think it's a much needed piece. Product growth, venture building is pretty nascent for us in India. And I think thanks to us for all the great work that you and the entire team does. And I'll quickly start sharing my screen. So quickly, hi, I'm Aakash. A quick about me. I currently drive growth at Hotstar. I've been with Hotstar for about almost 2.5 years now. Primarily was earlier looking after monetization growth on the ad side, giving shape to our ads platform and how we work with marketers. And of late, I'm now looking at our subscription growth piece. Prior to this, product growth strategy has been core to what I do, both at Housing and in between with a lesser known venture called IndusOS. Before that, failed twice at being an entrepreneur, once in gaming, once in classifieds, and we could talk about it later. But quickly, rather more defining traits, super obsessed about building and growing ventures. As Suhas mentioned, I'm keenly involved with and deeply involved with the venture community, both as an active angel, working with ventures to advise on growth. I would hardly define myself as a responsible capitalist. I think that is one piece which is a true trait that defines me, which in my head is broadly meaning that hey, monetization wealth is the true feedback loop, right? So both for one as an individual, even as an organization, and people might have a different view about it. I just wanted to call out that a lot of this you would see even in the thinking that I talked about going ahead. Planet conscious, I'm a struggling vegan. I've been a non-vegetarian for all my life, but over the last 1 year, I am trying to struggle very hard to go vegan. Besides work, I love poker, investing, and gaming. Right, I think and those three pretty much have been consistent for the last 10 years of my life. So quickly, before we begin, I wanted to just call out one key lens of how I approach growth, or I approach product or venture building. I think we are so new to the internet age that we all got bought onto the byline of saying that hey, product leads to revenue, product defines revenue. But I think the moment you start looking at the inverted lens of saying that how does revenue help us give shape to a better product? And an old adage is that, hey, but then what about consumer empathy? I think the simplest way, and this has been my way of trying to just simplify this for myself and my teams and organizations I've worked with, is revenue cross NPS is your only North Star metric. So if you're maximizing revenue, you're maximizing NPS, you're doing everything right. And that's the best feedback loop and the best thing to chase for any organization. And this is when you start looking at it with this lens, you're able to define what more and what new can you do to serve your customers. Today, broadly, just want to talk about what is growth, why experiments, how to experiment. And just a quick call out, your mileage may vary. If you're a PM, many pieces might seem counterintuitive to your typical way of looking at only consumer empathy lens. Again, a caveat, if anything seems racist, sexist, or any other discriminatory by mistake, that's not the intent. I love animal people and it's just agnostic of age and stage. Same principles apply for everything. So please forgive me if I do, in passing, make some comment. So jumping into what is growth, I think the simplest way of thinking of growth is owning and managing the full funnel for the business. And this is something that most people are familiar with. And if you think about that funnel and the core functions which help us broaden the funnel at every step, product marketing, operations, and or sales, growth basically needs to do two things. It sits as a cross-functional piece across that and tries to think about what can we do to optimize each point of the funnel, which inherently means it starts with an hypothesis. And how can we measure the effect, which by default is a framework of validation. And the simplest way I try to think of approaching growth, and this is something that just to spend some time on how growth even came into being, right? If you remember how Facebook was in a point when they plateaued in terms of their users and the business moving ahead. I think it was at about a mark of about 90 or 100 million now. And at that point of time, they had this, they had a team of individuals which is led by Chamath. You can read about him. He's a very well-known VC now. And they came up and said that, hey, we need to have a singular team which just obsesses about one thing. And that one thing in their head was MAUs. And this is pretty stark, right? In a time when everyone who was so called in the media business or using internet, and media giants before that were the ones who were running internet traffic primarily, they used to look at DAUs and just opt-outs, right? The revenues per DAU. And I think this was a defining moment for Facebook in their growth journey and in their journey of becoming what they are today. Because once they started looking at MAUs, and this can differ for every business, it can be very different for someone else. It already had what we call, a priced in or a baked in view of retention. And this is, I think, the genesis of, and at that point of time, he went across the group and said that, okay, let me pull up a quick team of engineers, product managers, marketers, data, and just focus on this, right? Just be utterly obsessive about this. And I think the best way, what I have put out there is see the ball, hit the ball. I think that defines most basic tenet of growth approach. You need to do a great job of seeing the ball, that this is exactly what we want to go and do, and continuously try and hit it out of the park, right? And looking at every part of the business, primarily it starts with product and marketing. If you think of two big levers that are there for growth, operations also do play a role, but it does not mean that your non-core functions do not. It's just that for today, I'm not going to touch upon how those non-core functions can also be a growth lever. Something as simple as finance is also a growth lever, but maybe later. And I think the core job of what a growth leader or a growth team does is this simply fix things so that they can help you increase those metrics that you're obsessing about, and just build everything, new pieces, existing pieces, iterate on pieces that help boost these metrics even higher. Growth does not simply mean experimentation. It is a mix of experimentation and innovation. You do not ever want to land in what is sometimes called optimization purgatory. But again, I think for today's piece, we'll focus more around the experimentation framework and innovation probably some other day. Why experiments? I think this is like the core of scientific method, right? When we, as kids, are growing up, we learn the scientific method, right? That hey, there is characterizations to whatever subject you're trying to be curious about, you're trying to inquire about, and curiosity and inquiry is the core tenet of how we move forward, right? Both as a business, both as a civilization, as individuals. Characterization, hypothesis, prediction, right? If you think of all those three things, uh, we deal with consumers as product folks, as organizations, and our best linear approach to figuring out what to do is lying there, right? You want to characterize, you want to observe and understand what is it that your consumer looks like. We have consumer personas, we have consumer segments. More importantly, we try and define and pigeonhole these consumers in terms of, hey, this is what I want to solve for this particular box, and this is how I want to go about it. Now, the what and how is majorly an hypothesis. It can be theoretical. It can be a pure brainstorming idea of someone who is down in your operations team. It could be an idea that comes from outside your organization. It could come from anywhere. But you need to have a sharp hypothesis. And I'll talk about it when we get into doing experiments. Predictions. You do intuitively make a prediction, right? The moment and just to pick the simplistic example, the moment we went down doing this webinar today, right? There was by default a hypothesis and a prediction baked into it, right? There is, if you think of TPF, they have one side of a speaker, the other side of community, and they have hypothesized about saying this is what a community needs to learn about. They would have made a prediction going about that. How does this impact our community? How does it make us become better at what we do as product managers or this entire community of product folks? And the simplest way of doing this is experimentation. Experiments help you to test all of the above. That's the only known framework to humankind, that how do you validate and test all of these things. And this is why even when you think of growth, where you're obsessing about a metric, which is stemming from a model view of your consumers and your environment as a business and what you want to achieve as a business, experimentation becomes your simplest way of trying to test all of these things, right? Because I think all of us who have been product managers would have come across a lot of opinions, right? We sometimes have opinions coming from our marketing team. We have opinions coming from our consumers. We have opinions coming from our leaders, right? If you are a product manager who is young and who just started, you would be thrown opinions from every side possible. And taking an opinion and breaking it down into how does it fit my characterization model? How do I build an hypothesis of what to do? How do I predict outcomes? How do I measure what I do against those outcomes? And how do we learn from that is all simply put experimentation. And then over the next 10 to 15 minutes, what I'll try and do is just play out how to experiment and just break it down into a linear journey of step 1 to 6. The first step obviously is define your obsession. And I've tried to color this at play with how certain things played out at housing. Happy to chat about more examples, but this is a slightly pointed one so that the framework becomes more clearer. I think the starting point of experimentation is defining your obsession. What is the right metric or matrices to chase for improving our business trajectory? That needs to be the single governing principle of picking out what activities you want to do. You need to start from your vision and you need to turn it into a measurable metric, which has a feedback loop built in. And at play, so housing, when we started, it started as a platform for typically renting properties. You were connecting providers who could be an owner, seller, broker, and seekers who were buyers, renters, brokers. At that time, only renters primarily. And that is what the platform did. It was doing the job of connecting these people, We were measuring these connections best in terms of leads that are generated on the platform, because that's your feedback loop for figuring out how the connection is going. And we needed to obsess about very simple pieces. If we are in this is what we do. Our obsession was very clear and broken down into very sharp metrics. For a given geography, which is a unit of our business, number of providers, right? How do we continuously keep increasing this? Because if you do not have this, how will you have seekers coming in? Connections made between providers and seekers, leads in and out, quality of connections. So we said these are the three things which matter and we need to obsess about. And this will define what we do across all those functions. And this is what the growth team would chase. Step two is obviously building an hypothesis. I think hypothesis, and there is a lot of things when you search, you'll find a lot of growth hacks. Firstly, growth is not a hack, it's a process. You'll find a lot of things around hypothesis, but I think the core tenet of defining a hypothesis is it starts with playing to a human instinct, right? Human instincts are very defined. You either have a gut, heart, brain, or genetics, right? These are the ways humans behave. And for a given set of consumers, which is what we call a cohort, each of these instincts would have a different mix and play out. And obviously, the ideal cohort is a cohort of one, which is a holy grail. All of us want to seek that. But that's broadly the core fundamental of how you go about thinking of an hypothesis. If I'm trying to solve a problem for a consumer sitting in Bangalore who is of type this, what do I do and how do I go about it? In an ideal world, I would want to solve it for 1 million people individually, but I cannot. It is, as of today, probably not humanly possible. But we try and move towards it continuously, thanks to all the recommendation work that which has been happening across the globe. But still, I would say we're pretty far from it. And the simpler answer of it would be, if we were to think of a holy, a great benchmark of doing personalization, and say that, hey, Netflix is one of those. I think on this call today, there'll be ample of us who have had something still more to demand from that, and not been completely, sometimes been underwhelmed, sometimes been overwhelmed with the entire recommendation system. So it doesn't mean that you'd stop doing it, but I think this is something that over time will get to a point where we realize this ideal dream of a cohort of a one. But till then, we reconcile with cohorts. And just to think about it at play, I've tried to contextualize it, is when you think of houses and homes, they play to all four, right? They play to gut. There is a need, it's a roof. It's the old adage of roti kapda makan, right? The platform plays to the brain, right? There is a selection win. For some cohorts, or maybe all cohorts, just the act of going and figuring out what to buy or what to rent is a selection win. It is a process which also has its own feedback loop, or similar to how games work. People enjoy it. Genitals. For some cohorts, a good house is I have a right. It's your it's your way of finding a better mate. It's your way of being more appealing and hot, right? My house, like at least for a majority of folks who exist, your own house is your own home, and it has such a deep connection to how it appeals to your human instinct at a heart level. So housing plays to all four. I think the more important piece is defining a hypothesis from there. Different cohorts will behave differently. We'll lead with one, which is the value part or the gut part, but sequence others. So that's your hypothesis. You're saying that because it applies to all four, if we have to do a better job of making connection, we want to try and figure out which one works for which cohort and for which user. And the best way to do it probably is you start with one and then sequence others across all the touch points in a consumer journey of trying to find a house. And what do we need to do? We need to figure a way to lead with one over the other based on user signals. An example of that would be if a user comes from Safari, hey, he's an Apple buyer, probably generals might be a good starting point, right? So these are just examples of hypothesis and I think the point I would like to land is that hypothesis for any growth framework need to start with your consumer set. You can find a dime a dozen hypothesis around improving conversion rates, just doing some experiments. But very frankly, till the point you nail down on your own hypothesis, which is very true to your consumer set, you would be doing a pretty shoddy job at trying to optimize very, very small wins. Step three is brainstorming. And you need to take your hypothesis, and it acts as a guardrail for brainstorming. And typically, a lot of you would have come across this challenge, right? Where when you brainstorm, and I think I myself have been, guilty to doing this, you tend to diverge a lot, right? And you're not able to converge very easily. What a strong hypothesis helps you do is it becomes the guardrail for brainstorming, so that you're not too open-ended. It helps you identify metrics that would validate the hypothesis. So those are the only things you're trying to seek in a brainstorm. And an at-play example of that would be, we wanted to increase the number of seekers for providers of new houses on our platform. So this is around 2013 or 14, when we wanted to move into making a new revenue business for us, which was home selling, right? And we said that, okay, our current audience today is primarily rent seekers, that's what the platform is known for. Yes, we'll create home selling. We'll run, the core structure of the product was anyway built for growth, super SEO friendly. So we'll start getting traffic in, but we have this core set of renters, right? That's what we are known for. And that is something that we have built a strong, sticky product for already. How can we leverage that, right? We think that the following pathways can lead to a positive connection. We said a known seeker with an active search for renting, might discover a new housing project in vicinity of their intended location. And if you think of renting versus EMI as an equation, that might be the method to influence our existing consumers and create a funnel on them. So core idea being, if you go back to the funnel that we spoke about, how can we acquire more people from our existing consumer set for this new business that we're doing now? Other hypothesis of, and again, a validation after brainstorming, people who did not make a buy connection. And this is when people have already started. And let's say you're 3-4 months into having traffic on your website for buying, even after an active search, might see an email of a new supply and go down the funnel, right? So if you think of home buying as a journey for a consumer, it's slightly long drawn, it's not instantaneous. And if people came to the platform in the past, did a lot of active searching, but to our best guess, did not make a connection. We have a decent feedback loop of that on our own platform, right? When people do submit their form and say that, hey, I'm interested in this property. Can we do this for our proposition of new supply which comes to the platform? And hence, again, move towards making that a better funnel. And these are pretty simplistic examples, but I just want to highlight how experiments and hypotheses are pretty simple. And the compounding effect of multiple of these run over time is what leads to growth. So we seek to look at the following metrics, right? We said, okay, click rates on buy property with EMI pricing when seated on the result page for rent. And then we follow through page time of such post-click visits, right? So people will come to a polygon on the platform to search for a house, and can we seed a similar EMI rental property there? That seemed like a good hypothesis. Okay, the second one, if we have people who have lapsed, we do a reach out through emails, sent to buy search who did not make a successful connection. That could be a great experiment. But the moment you get into research, which is the fourth step, is when you start getting closer to your truer experiment design. And research primarily applies, going back to what I said, that product marketing, sales operations, there's so many pieces that translate into a consumer experience that you finally deliver as an organization. You need to build buy-in and align all the teams. Everyone needs to see merit. Everyone needs to be aligned towards chasing it. And that is the best way for any growth team to also define for themselves what they're going to do. You need to find the least effort path to experiment holistically. I think this is one key piece where most organizations, and the difference between a good growth org and a mediocre growth org is, I think up to step 1, 2, and 3, a lot of people can work towards it. You have a good product team, you have good growth folks, you'll be able to think through those and do a good job. But what separates good growth teams is you're able to always find the least effort path. If you go back to saying that, hey, if every problem is going to be an engineering problem for me, and I'm continuously t-shirt sizing, I have so many things to do, right? I have already my BAU optimizations to run. I have every piece of my product backlog that I have to service. If you get caught in being dependent on engineering as your roadblock, you probably might not be able to do justice to both. And I'll talk about it in the at play. I've tried to pick exactly the same framework. Measure the upside and define success. This is again a very critical part to your research and what you do in terms of experiment design. Be very clear what is the upside you are chasing. And at play, and when we think about the piece that we spoke about earlier, we figured out that it's a very high effort for doing a seeding experiment on a result page. It can even have a negative impact on connections, which are currently being made on the platform. Since your top 10 results drive maximum CTR today, we need to have a much stronger validation for this before we even pick it up as a product experiment. But through research, we also found out that, hey, off deck, we can easily test out, since we can deliver a near product-like experience on retargeting, right? The costs money if you try and do this off deck. So we need to be sharper in our experimentation. And this part of research is what leads you to your final part of the experiment design. Experiment design is, I think, the core pieces: who we expose the experiment to, what is the copy and design that we do, both on product, on deck, off deck, wherever you're running this, how long will we run this, and if we fail, what next? What would indicate that we should kill this? Because one very, very core piece to experimentation is failures are not absolute. You need to know that when you're defining experiment, a reason for failure could be anywhere, right? The only time you do want to kill an experiment is when it proves your hypothesis is wrong. And this is another part of trying to run growth very well. You need to know how to measure failure, how to understand failure, how to do a post-mortem of a failure, and even a success. And more importantly, define when do you kill an experiment. It needs to be killed only when it validates clearly that your core hypothesis is wrong. At play, we said, okay, because it requires money, we're doing this off deck. Let's target people who show affinity towards emerging locations in Bombay and Bangalore, right? Again, who do we expose this experiment to? We said rent versus EMI offset shouldn't be a huge piece over there. If you think of other geographies, rent versus EMI is a very, very skewed piece. These are two locations where rent versus EMI is not as skewed. Let's target people who have shown top decile rent value for polygons. So if you think of a polygon, which in our case was like a small micro market, we said because it's going to take money and we want to be very sharp about this, let's only target people who are in the top decile. So if I'm targeting people in Powai and Mumbai, I would only go after people who were showing, an interest in rental, which was north of 60K per month, right? And this is way back in 2013. Let's run this on FB carousel ads, which is going to define our copy and design, and appeal to home ownership as a key heart trait, right? And which, if you go back to what I said about human instinct, when you think of copy and design, it really needs to appeal to your leading hypothesis around human instinct. We said that if you're trying to nudge over a consumer who is a renter towards a buying journey, we need to play to the heart, right? We can't be playing to value only. Value probably is the core idea of where we are designing an experiment. That's how we're picking our audience. And the last part was, what would success look like? And we said that, okay, if we get CTRs at 50% of what our ads for normal, medium to low buying intent retargeting gets, we'll go further. Else, we'll see, right? Else we'll go back to the drawing board and visit. And this was very important for us, saying that if we think of people who are, even though it's a small base, and we're talking about time when we're launching and building our buy vertical, even though if it's a small base, even on that, we can still figure out, thanks to our own platform data, what is a high buying intent, medium buying intent, low intent kind of an audience. And across all of those cohorts, measure our funnels very differently. We run our ads also basis those cohorts. And if this is in this hacky form, even getting to same half the CDRs of what a medium or a low buying intent cohort does, there is some merit to the hypothesis and we should go further. And that's what we defined as a clear predicted outcome that we are seeking, or rather a desired outcome that we are seeking. Step 6, you run it and you analyze. Key pieces to running and analyzing: no p-hacking, which broadly means that don't play around with statistical significance, don't play around with data, be 100% transparent and layer dimensions to data as much as required. You shouldn't be trying to find truths that you are seeking, but let the experiment data show it to you unbiased. Key part again, review it with peers. Review it with peers internally, with your product peers, marketing peers, review it peers outside. And try and get to a proper analysis which you then present to your team. Again, at Play, we ran the ads and found that for certain polygons, we met our desired outcome goals, but did not meet our lead conversion goals. So when you think of housing and the journey of what happens on the platform, it's a real estate platform. People come, if I show someone an ad, they might click, but then they're going to go through the details of the property. And if they don't show interest in that property, that's not a connection made. And which is what we saw, that our lead conversion goals were not being met. We reviewed it with peers, and our peers suggested that CTRs are promising. And this is when I say peers, this is our product team, which found the CTRs to be very promising. But that are conversion pages, and they added a new layer to the hypothesis that the conversion page was still the same, and we should figure if we can change that. Again, feature sizing, you can't do that on a running product today, unless and until we decide to go down this path as a definition of a product and becoming part of our core product roadmap. So we said, okay, if we fast follow this experiment leads to results, we will double down. And we got buy-in to run one pure off-platform pages. So imagine, like, we were only running ads till now. We were not running off-platform conversion pages. A property page was still housing.com flash. We got a chance to got buy-in to say that, hey, what we'll do is we'll do a hacky job of trying to just, again, see that it can, some changes to the copy and design of those pages help us do a better job of converting. So for the renter to buyer prospects, now the entire ads funnel was set aside differently, a separate landing or a trap page, as we used to call it. And we started seeing lead conversions at par, right? And the biggest piece was we started seeing quality being higher. So when you think of quality, for us, it was once you have made a connection, once someone has filled a form, how do the seeker and the provider make that connection, right? Because it's property, it's an online to offline, you still have to do a walk-in, you still have to have a conversation. Our walk-in rates were higher for the end provider than the baseline connections. Again, this is what I'm talking about, how experiments need to be super fast, low code, because all of these things, each experiment outcome, if you look at it unbiased with an unbiased lens, will give you newer insights, many a times, if not most. And this was a new insight, which itself became a new trajectory of an experiment for us. Can talk about it if we have time later. Very quickly, TLDR, how to quickly start down the growth path, right? Have a cross-functional team which focuses on growth, a mix of product, marketers, and TA. Marketers, because they help you play to the human instinct, and that's what they do for a living. Product folks help with upholding the scientific method. DA helps find patterns which you can chase. And the core pieces that you need to be super clear about if you want to build out a growth org and chase growth. You need to be intentional and always start with a human behavior. I think this is the one step that most growth teams tend to get wrong. I spend a lot of time with a lot of young ventures also who start with just their simple platform in and out view. I would always start with a consumer-led view. Cohorts and not segments, the typical niche, right? Mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive. Understand the difference between cohorts and segments and aggregates when you're trying to observe and build models around how your users your product, and the environment. All three of those variables interact and behave. Uh, and let that be your governing principle or your data frame for understanding user behavior and journey improvements. Uh, Always build a model. Never run an experiment without having a model in place, impact to that model, and measuring exactly that. Experiments which are run sans this will probably just be futile efforts with no outcome. And again, I can share, and what I'll do probably is try and share those frameworks around how to have an experimental model and testing and planning frameworks. Uh, Always solve for revenue growth NPS is the best anchor. When you think of experimentation, you need to have an anchor. Uh, Otherwise, you could run millions of experiments and not get anywhere. How to prioritize, how to pick experiments. Let that anchor be in revenue growth NPS. Uh, do more and be nimble. Don't be dependent on engineering bottlenecks or marketing bottlenecks or even copy bottlenecks. If you have to figure out a way to run copies very differently, uh, if your own marketing team can't support it, figure out. The number of tools which are now available are a plethora of those, right? I think even automation when it comes to marketing has gone miles ahead. Today, a young company can automate their marketing. If you want to get a singular view of a consumer, I'll pick one simplest example that we have implemented very recently. Some of you might be using CleverTap for running notifications and then still targeting people on Facebook. Just as API connection between taking your CT data, pulling it out into a Gucci sheet, using an API to do frequency capping across notifications and or even sequencing of messaging across notifications and your off deck, which is Facebook in this case. Automation has come a long way, right? Just be super nimble about this. This should not be dependent on saying that, hey, we need to deploy automation. We need to take a mammoth task of building a Titanic every time. You don't need to. You can, if you just want to sail, start sailing. Embrace failure. I think that's the biggest piece. A strike rate of 50% is good. 50% plus. If you are running, if you're being very nimble, you're running multiple experiments. 50% plus strike rate is a great one. And just a parting note: see the ball, hit the ball. I think just works well. Build that as a core viewpoint or a core ethos of your team, irrespective of what you are doing, what domain you play to. If you follow see the ball, hit the ball, try and see the ball properly. Just be very sharp with it and hit it. You'll always have a good strike rate. And yep, I think the quick version of this was that. So I'll stop sharing now.
Awesome. I love that deck, Akash, and thanks for being so detailed about it. I think, with that example and, the six-step framework that you had, I think that was really useful. We have a bunch of questions. So I think I also have a couple of questions on the deck, but I'll quickly jump into some of the questions we have. And then towards the end, I think something that will be super interesting also added to, the experimentation and growth part is also on if we can talk 5 minutes about the career that you've had. And I think we had this conversation one-to-one, but I think that'll be super useful for the folks here. So I'll jump right into the one that we have here. Um, Guys, there's also a poll, so in case you guys are on the Slido link, do definitely hit that up. The one that we have right on top is, I think it's someone who's senior right now. So someone who's leading a team, at a VP, SVP level. How does experimentation requires, you to be data driven? And do you believe this culture needs to come top down? Often there are times where, you need to go with your gut, the 70% data, lots that we hear from outside. So is this something that needs to come top down, or in case you were starting to build a team, how do you build this culture, a data driven culture for experiments?
So I think top down, yes, I think that plays a lot to it. So if in any organization you have a top down view of saying that, hey, we will be very sharp with looking at data and understanding user journeys, that would always enable a growth team to do well. But I think even if it's a younger organization or as an individual, right, as a product manager, even if let's say you don't have a growth function in the company and you think that you want to focus on growth, I think data is such a great tool or an asset that if you're able to present it and articulate it well, that cultural shift, and this is my observation, even in an organization which might not be top-down data-driven, it can be brought about. Though, will it be 100% chance? No, there are a lot of organizations which are very gut-driven, but I think that's what all of us do, right? This community and all product folks, we always have to fight for the right. And so that's, I think, top-down will always help, but that shouldn't be a blocker for you.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I agree. Anything that's worked for you at Hotstar, or you didn't have this kind of an issue at the company?
So actually, I've not had to face this ever.
Yeah.
I've always
Fair.
found organizations who have always had the same view. But so I can't comment from experience.
Fair. No worry. Yeah, I think that's great. Moving on, I think the next bit is yeah, I think this is around failures. So it's a good question that shares that you shared that 50% strike rate, 50% plus is great. But how do you deal with failures? The question here is no one talks enough about failures, resulting in this dystopia or this fantasy around, PMing, product management as such. So any anecdotes that you can share from your days at Housing, maybe anything that you can share from the startups that you're mentoring?
On failure?
Yep.
Yep, I can. I think they were, as I said, ample, right? So I'll pick a failure, right? So on Housing, we used to have the interested and the connection form, the lead form, without an OTP, right? And so people could just come in, enter any number, and it was done, right? We did not have an enforced step of trying to see property details. So most of our peers, even at a property detail level, used to ask you to fill a form, right? And we said, okay, we will also do this, right? It seems very intuitively right that, hey, if someone is truly of intent of finding a property, it will help me do my growth marketing better if I actually capture the details, right? Even at a one step above the funnel, right? Because as Housing, we were capturing it only after you made up your mind and you said, I'm interested. Our peers were capturing it at a point of saying that you want to see details, give us your details, right? And we started testing this. And what we realized is our peers were doing this. Hypothesis-wise seems right. If you're intent, you'll be more than happy. We actually tanked on our metrics downwards, right? And the more important piece for us was to understand that if the hypothesis was true, why did we tank, right? And the reason we tanked is because on our platform, the core, if you think of Housing and big difference from other platforms at that point of time, we used to show a lot of information upfront in the listing itself, right? Our listing was never just a name and an image, right? It was a pretty information dense listing. And at that point of time, if you induce friction for low intent people who anyway got 80% of the information that would help them think about a property upfront, there was no reason to go down this path, right? So I think this was one example of failure. And how do you deal with this? You need to bring this out. You need to understand this, and you need to say, okay, what was my objective? My objective was to try and capture some consumer details so that I can do a better job of retention and aiding them down their journey. And if that is my objective, this is not probably the only way I can do it, right? We picked it up from someone and we tried to replicate it. Probably the right thing for our platform would be something else, right? And we went down a different path. We said, okay, let's have nudges for when do you shortlist a property? Can we call out shortlisting and have that as a nudge for saying that, okay, if you have to do this, you need to log in, right? And multiple such interventions over time. And again, the answer doesn't come in one go. So for us, this simple piece of saying that how do we capture more consumer details so that our growth marketing becomes better, which is a purely greedy organizational objective. Getting it right took us about, I think, 9 to 12 months. Right? So I can talk as much about failures, and that's why I said you need to embrace failures.
Absolutely. Have you had any situation like, you tried something, didn't work, again tried something, didn't work, again tried, multiple series? Or do you think it sometimes affects the morale of the team? Have you come across any situations there? How do you keep yourself going through that journey, say 9 to 12 months?
It will affect your morale if the effort is high and the outcome, both the direct outcome or even the apparent outcome that, hey, we are getting somewhere, right? We're probably not getting where we want to get to, but we are moving ahead, right?
Yeah.
If none of those come and the effort is high, obviously it'll impact the model, right? So, which
Right.
is why if you are in a continuous experimentation framework, the last piece that I called out, that you need to be very low effort. You need to be super clear that, hey, I should be able to run experiments without putting in too much effort of all my teams, because
Right.
failures are bound to happen.
Yeah.
You don't want to kill experiments after the first failure.
Yeah.
Sometimes multiple failures might lead to an outcome. But if
Right.
you are putting in too much effort to even run experiments,
Yeah.
team morale will go down, right?
Correct.
So I think
Correct.
that's the key. You need to pick and
Step.
understand how to do it without too much effort.
Right. So step by step, right? Build it up step by. Just move the needle a little by little, and then you'll get there
Yeah.
for sure. At any point of time, how many experiments do you think, or in your experience, small companies, housing, Hotstar, anything, what do you think is the range of concurrent experiments that run at larger organizations versus, just to give a idea?
It's a function of what stage you are in as a company,
Okay.
right?
Right. Right.
For someone like Facebook, probably today there are at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of experiments running on any given day, right?
Wow.
But if you think of bandwidth, when you're a young company,
Hmm.
probably you actually don't even do just experiments. You probably start batting a lot, right? You try and do more of innovation. You try and find some very, very fast, high sticky PMF pieces, right?
Hmm.
Uh, that is when you get into an experimentation framework. After you've matured a bit, you get into an
Right.
experimentation framework. But you would still have a lot of work that your teams still have to do, right? If you're a small team, you have so much to do. And which is why for smaller teams, picking experiments is a very, very important piece. You need to really be very sharp about what experiments to pick. Maybe
Right.
you do not run more than, and I think a simpler answer to that is
Hmm.
don't run experiments across the funnel. Pick up
Got
one
it.
step of the funnel, right?
Got it.
And just solve for that. Run for one thing for a longer time instead of
Got it.
cutting yourself thin. And that probably is the right thing to do at a mid-mature stage.
Yeah.
At an extremely mature stage, when you have all the resources available, please go ahead and run as many experiments.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a function of the resources available, and yeah, I think the question was just to understand. At bigger companies, there are multiple experiments running in parallel, like you mentioned. Hundreds and
But
thousands
for
of them.
most of us, right, most of the
Yeah.
people on this call,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the assumption being that we are in maturing or best
Yeah.
case, mid to slightly mature stage startups or
Yeah.
ventures,
Yeah.
I would strongly bank on saying that obsess about one part and
Hmm.
one piece of the funnel,
Hmm.
and run experiments only for that for a good 3 to 6 months, right? Instead of cutting yourself thin. That's an
Yes.
easier framework to do in terms of saying that how do I prioritize? Pick your prioritization and what part of the funnel really matters to you the most,
Hmm.
and obsess about that, and run all your experiments focused with that. So if top of the
Interesting.
funnel and acquisitions is your most important piece today,
Hmm.
and which is the case, right? So even at housing we had this, right?
Yeah.
At one point of time, so think of our absolute user base being like a very, very important piece for us, right? For
Hmm.
whatever reasons, for maybe even the reason of saying that, hey, this is what helps you position better for a fund base, right?
Yeah.
Uh, that was the most important piece, right? And
Hmm.
all our efforts were geared towards that,
Hmm.
right? So we did not cut ourselves in and said that, hey, let me improve leads, let me improve quality of my connections, right? We obsessed only about growing our top of the funnel.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I think couple of more questions I'll pick from here. There's one on YouTube. It's on my DM. I think Amit is also on the call, but I think not sure if we had this conversation also on the group. I think they're referring to the screenshot where now they move the comment section up. There are multiple experiments happening. So in bigger organizations, especially maybe your current or any idea that you have, there are multiple teams trying to vie for that one particular that particular bit or real estate. So how do you pitch for that? And I think YouTube is a prime example today where you can see it. You can see that there's so many things happening there, and it's confusing for the user. So how do you pitch internally to get your project ahead of the others? Have you had this kind of
I've had, and as I mentioned, I think this, and even at YouTube,
uh
my guess would be they follow the same piece that net impact maximization, right? So if you're vying for the same piece of real estate, as some people call it, right? You always need to be doing net maximization for the org. So you'll have multiple teams. Maybe some team is focusing on, I think YouTube has a team of alternate revenue products, right? Which tries and does on YouTube Live, you can do donations, and they're continuously finding newer ways to monetize beyond just ads and subscription, right? So at the end, across all those three teams, when you think of a growth function, they'll try and find out that what is the net positive impact across all of these three, right? So if it's a piece of real estate, it's going to have a trade-off, right?
Correct.
Someone will go down, someone will go up. It's a equation for them, right? And for most people, it needs to be, and that's why it needs to be a model, right? You need to be pretty clear that, hey, across all these three, is this experiment or this change going to get me net positive overall if I add all those pieces? And if it is, then yes, you go ahead with it. And probably sometimes some teams might feel let down because of it, but I think that's the only answer to it.
Got it. So it's a function of okay, just a follow up on that. So do you believe that there should be one North Star metric, or do you guys have like a bunch of primary metrics and secondary metrics? Which school of thought are you?
I am of the school of thought that there's only one North Star metric, revenue cross NPS, right? And all the questions that you're talking about also arise because of having multiple North Stars.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And which is why, some teams might be chasing something, some teams might be chasing something. And I think this is one core difference between orgs who do growth better than their peers. They have a very, very sharp and singular anchor, right? And the reason for that is, and you brought up the YouTube example, right? I think YouTube also is now learning. The reason you see all of those things. So we as a product community have been super influenced by how the value works, right? If you go back to my deck, the first slide that I called out, that product, revenue, product, that switch. I think Chinese companies have done that really well, right? So what you're seeing on YouTube now is like 1/10 of what a Chinese platform would look like, right? I remember at Housing when our design teams used to design and we used to look at benchmarks of similar players in China. They used to look like, it was like it was a food court, right? It was, everything was happening. 1,000 things were happening on the page, right?
I agree.
But I think those companies have, and this is a big difference, right? We have all learned product more with the value bias till now, right? And if you think of what is happening in China, you will realize that, and the core thing that is happening differently over there is exactly that. They are not obsessing about multiple things. They're obsessing about a single thing, being very sharp about revenue, right? And at the end, that's your best feedback loop, right? And like one example I keep calling out to people is in the West, once there was a search, commerce, and the social player built out, which had networks effect kicked in, it has been impossible for anyone to come from behind and dislodge them, right?
Correct.
But when you think of China, even after Baidu, Ali, and Tencent being there, ByteDance is the best example, which came from behind and did dislodge, right? And at network effects having played out, you don't see that happen so easily, right?
Correct.
So I think that is one thing that I talk about a lot, that we surely need to start learning from the Eastern world, because our peers there are actually doing a lot of things which are pretty clean and very pointed in terms of building a venture.
Got it. Do you think the Indian ecosystem is closer to the East or the West, or in the next, maybe not till now, but next?
It's not even. It's not about closer. So there's a debate I used to have at Housing, right? And all of us used to say, "Are we closer to East? Is it a human behavior? Is it a human thing?" I think it's not. It's just that it's the journey and evolution of internet, right? Internet and tech products, the journey and evolution started one way, and we are too nascent. Think of the entire industry, right? Google was what, 95, maybe, I think, right? So we are talking early 90s to now. It's too short a time frame to be very fixated that this is it. This is how we will do it.
Right.
We are all learning. I don't think it's about East versus West. I think our Eastern peers have learned really well to play to growth, and that's something to learn from.
Got it. So inspiration from both, but adapt to your market, right? Inspiration. Got it. Jumping back right in, best way to practice if one doesn't have the access to the amount of data you all have. So I think maybe this is in reference to the amount of data OTT platforms have today. But say smaller, the smaller early stage startup don't have that much data. So meaningful A/B tests, any idea there? How do they think about it?
If you don't have enough scale to get statistically significant data,
Yeah,
and I can share resources around what is statistically significant and what scale
yeah,
works.
yeah.
If you don't have it, as I said, early stage, you need to play to your gut. You play on innovation more than A/B testing, right?
Got it.
So till the time you don't have that scale where
Yeah.
data can give you answers on back of experiments, which are statistically significant,
Mm-hmm.
you can't live with it, right? You will have to do the harder work of actually innovating only and trying out multiple things. And that's why startups are hard won, right? You have to do
Mm-hmm.
so much more to get to a point. But once you do get certain critical mass, so imagine I would say for a consumer platform, I
Yeah,
would say if you're an app maker,
yeah,
uh, any point beyond, I think 40K DAU, 50K DAU, you would have enough data which could help you do statistically significant experiments, right?
nice.
So I think that in my head is a simpler benchmark saying that, hey, if you have hit
Absolutely.
40, 50K DAU,
Yeah,
and if you're an app maker, you
yeah,
are good to start down the path of doing statistically significant experiments.
got it. So someone who has say like 2K, 3K, just starting off, they should focus on, is that where
So
doing things that don't scale fits in?
it does fit in, right? Because over there you can't run. So imagine, right, 2K
Yeah,
is so small a base to get to, say, an experiment. If you're
yeah,
going to do an expose and a control
yeah,
on one particular thesis, right?
yeah.
Just bring it down. 2K will boil down to such a small number.
Correct, correct.
And the time that will take to run that experiment for you is
Yeah,
going to be insane to reach statistical significance.
right, right, right. What do you think is the prerequisite to this? Say someone who wants to, is getting started. Maybe some resources later on Twitter.
I'll
I
share
can
a
share
list
the
of resources.
perfect, perfect. So yeah, maybe guys, whoever put this question out, definitely do tweet out to Aakash. I think you're active on Twitter. Twitter is good.
Yep, yep.
Twitter. Okay, awesome. A couple of more questions. Personally, in the Indian ecosystem, or your current role, what has been the major challenges for you over this period or currently? In general, I think the more of a product
Ma-
slash career challenge.
Major challenge. I think major challenge always being growth focused has been trying to drive alignment. So when you think of
Okay.
growth, because it always tries to play on multiple levers of both
Uh-huh.
product, operation, sales, and marketing, right? Uh, Driving alignment is the biggest challenge
Mm-hmm.
because I think we are still learning that I think 99% of the orgs, right, are still of the old view,
Yeah.
product to revenue. That's how most of us have built out consumer companies, right?
Right.
Uh, and in such an environment, there is so much loggerhead, right? I think the simplest answer that comes to my mind a lot of times, and which I tell at least younger startups, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is that, hey, product managers have this old saying, right, in which a lot of us talk about that they're the mini CEO.
CEOs. Yeah.
And there was this Facebook thing of I'm the CEO of Bish, right? I always tell product managers, you are not the CEO of Bish, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
because at the end, if you're in a startup, if you're in any
Yeah.
organization, uh, a CEO is supposed to do capital allocation. A CEO is supposed to do maximizing results for the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, unless and until you are the executive sponsor and the executive holder of driving what the business needs to drive, you are not a CEO, right? I think
Right.
that is the one thing that needs to be learned.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said at the start of my deck, that hey, consumer empathy cannot be the only lens, right?
Right.
I strongly contest it, and it's a contrarian view to product, right? But
Got it.
you need to anchor yourself to revenue and NPS. The multiplier
Mm-hmm.
of that has all answers baked in, right? So the example I said that for Facebook, when Chamath and team had to identify that what's the one metric to obsess about, they said
Yeah.
mouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
MAUs had everything baked in. It had retention baked in. It has engagement baked in. It has everything baked in. It's a L0
Mm-hmm.
metric which just works, right?
Right.
Same way for an organization, revenue and NPS has everything baked in. If you are doing
Right.
consumer empathy well, your NPS would be good, right? If
Right.
you're doing a shoddy job at it, your NPS would be low.
Right.
Can you think of a company which does insane revenue and has a bad NPS? I can't think of an example, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
be insane revenue, mediocre NPS. You
Mm-hmm.
could be mediocre revenue, insane NPS, right? Good places to be at.
Mm-hmm.
You will never find low NPS and insane revenue. Doesn't exist. Doesn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is an aberration which might happen for a very short period of time. It will never sustain, right?
Right.
So
Right.
consumer empathy is baked in into the feedback loop of revenue and NPS.
Mm-hmm. Fair point. Fair point. Um, I think next one is moving towards career. I think it's a career question, which is someone who's 25 and wants to break into high growth startups and wants to work into VP, SVP roles like you. What would your, like, what are three things he can do or he or she can do? And he or she asks, is there an MBA that is required in today's world?
For the second one, I'm the wrong person to ask that
Yeah,
question.
and I was going to point that out, but yeah,
For the second one, I'm completely the wrong person to ask that question.
yeah,
For the first one, I think how
yeah,
to go about it. I think deliver impact, right? Uh, Start small. The fastest, I think you already had someone talk about the career progression path
yeah,
at the end,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The most important piece, if you want to accelerate that path, is
Mm,
to deliver impact early, right? Maybe start small. Pick a venture
mhm,
which will allow you to test all your thinking, right? And run whatever you want to do. So for me, if I'm a growth professional, post housing, for me, the most important part was let me pick venture which would
mhm,
help me apply whatever I've learned, right? Which would give me the freedom to apply what I've learned.
mhm.
And hence, I actually went down the path of working with a much smaller venture, right? Uh,
Right.
More importantly, the selection choice, right? How do you choose something like this? It's not just about where will you get the freedom, where will you get the right environment also. So post
Right.
housing, one thing that I learned was, hey, because we are so much a web-based product, we are not a high frequency use case for consumers. Hence, we are not app-driven product. And if I look at all massive products who are doing a great job of monetizing and who are big companies today, they are app heavy, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so I think it's pretty clear that when you think of engagement, retention, monetization, an app first or an app oriented product is something where you would want to learn and apply things at, right?
Very interesting.
So, which was the one choice that I made, that
Mhm,
where will I get the freedom? Where do I
mhm,
get it right? Where do I
mhm,
get the right environment?
mhm,
And where do I get it for India? After housing,
mhm,
my one, I might be wrong, but for me, it seemed like that, hey, we started the housing journey saying we're going to make housing like the biggest thing in India.
uh-huh.
And we just realized that India is very different. India
Yeah.
is people who were searching for houses online was very small.
Mhm,
It is still growing, right?
mhm,
But when you think of mass India, probably the product does not even hold up, right?
mhm.
So the other selection criteria was let me find a place where I will be able to be closer to the mass India, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is what I would do. That if you
Nice.
want to accelerate, so one trajectory is you keep doing just getting incremental work, do slightly more better work at a bigger place, right?
Mhm,
That's one way people approach it. I would approach it that if your intention is to accelerate,
mhm,
then take a punt, take a bet.
mhm.
Uh, we go down the path of prioritizing learning. If you're 20, 25, prioritize
Yep.
learning over, your outcomes and returns, right?
Yep.
And find a place where you'll be able to apply your art, your skill, and deliver impact.
Awesome. I think these are great leading questions. Just the last bit, find a place. Any hack to find a place? Like, how does one get to know of opportunities? Is it like, do you track like Crunchbase, see who's got funded? Is that a right way to go about it? Or, grab coffee with interesting people, talk to them? Like, these are different things I've heard. Just two things that I shared. But do you have like, I think, a framework that you could suggest for that?
I don't have a exact precise framework for it to ask,
No,
but
no, yeah.
I think a combination of all of those, right? I think a one thing which has changed a lot, and
Mhm,
the last 10 to 12 years I have been doing this.
mhm.
What has changed a lot is stuff like this. Right? We have so many
Yep.
communities now. We
Right.
have what you're running. There are multiple more.
Yep.
Uh, we have also found most of the product talks are growing. You have so
Yep.
many new startups who have reached critical scale, who are now
Mhm,
who are looking to add more people, right?
mhm.
I think the most important thing is talk. The same way as a product manager, and I think I'll stress on that. I think a lot of our product managers don't talk to consumers as much as
Uh-huh.
just looking at data. I think that's one very big piece which is amiss,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to do a much better job at it.
Right.
Same way, if you think of yourself as a product,
Mm-hmm.
talk, go talk to more consumers. If your consumer is enterprise, who
Mm-hmm.
would, when I say your consumer as you as a product is, an organization which would draw value out of your talent, right?
Right.
Go talk to as many as possible. Don't shy away. One thing that I tell young product managers or young folks is apply to every job every month. Doesn't matter, right? Uh, More conversations you'll have, more harder questions you will see, more learnings you would have about other organizations who are out there. It is just going to help you improve your art.
Very interesting. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that was useful. Hope he or she got his answer. Moving quickly, Akash, how much time do you have on this session? Any hard stop? Couple of more questions.
Mm, yeah, can take a couple more.
Okay, awesome. Next one is on org structure. How does a product slash growth org structure generally look at a housing or a Hotstar? And what is one thing if you could change in the current setup, what would you want to, improve?
I think uh, unless and until you are a very, very, there are very few cases where I would think growth as a function
Mm-hmm.
should be in isolation, right? That it should
Okay.
either be in product or someplace. Right? Growth should ideally be a cross-functional unit, and uh, that is only when you can do that job well, right? Because when you think of product, people who are
Yeah.
managing product uh, have a core task of shipping product. Right? That itself is a mammoth task. When you
Mm-hmm.
think of marketing, folks there have the core task of running marketing, executing marketing. That itself is a mammoth task, right?
Yep.
The moment you make growth a subset of
Mm-hmm.
either of these, you are not doing justice to it, right? Because as I said, growth has to look at what is happening on both those fronts and even a third front of sales and operations, and saying that, okay, how do I build out a path which works? What do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? How do
Mm-hmm.
I build consensus? How do I
Mm-hmm.
drive alignment? How do I
Mm-hmm.
drive buy-in? So I think growth, because inherently it is about experimentation and innovation, it needs to be cross-functional. It needs to sit outside of those, right?
Right.
And it needs to be run by a team which is just, I think, the one word that comes to my mind is shameless, right? You probably get rejected, your ideas get thrown out of the box,
Yeah.
thrown out of the window. Someone says, I can't execute. You just need to just continuously say that, hey, no, this is what I care about. And you just need to get that buy-in and you need to make it happen. So
Right.
shorter answer, cross-functional teams, as per me, very strong
Mm-hmm.
belief. Cross-functional
Mm-hmm.
team with a good mix of people who come from product and marketing, right? If you
Right.
go back to what I started as my growth experimentation framework, I said that understanding human instinct is the core to hypothesis,
Right.
uh, and working backwards from there. So you need to have, and you also need to have the scientific method, ability to understand, how much effort will go in, or what we call t-shirt sizing, right? So a good mix of product and marketing is
Right.
what helps build a good growth.
Interesting. Interesting. I think the next question lies as an add-on to this. Compared to the Valley, I think you mentioned, Facebook, there was an interesting thing, they had this, it is widely written about, first 7 days, 15 users, they found this as a growth hack. There isn't so much written about Indian startups. So do you think there's a particular reason why that isn't coming out as much, or is there any way to get these insights?
Shorter answer, how many of us have done something like that, right? At that scale, we haven't, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So that's the reason why you
Exactly.
would not find too much of it. You would find
Yeah.
a lot of growth about Airbnb,
Ah,
Facebook, Pinterest, right? Because those are platforms who have pulled it off at that scale
right.
and have matured and are now actually running very sharp growth odds, right?
Right.
I think for India, it's just nascency. It's just early.
Correct.
We are
Correct.
getting there. So I would imagine, right, over time, everyone from an academy to Swiggy, right? Everyone would have will start
Yeah.
hitting much larger scales, and then you
Yep.
will start seeing more of this, right? How did they grow? What did they
Absolutely.
do?
Absolutely. So it's just a function of time, right? Like the
Just a
ecosystem there
function
is
of time.
right. Right. Fair point.
And You guys are running a great job, no? You get more people. You should start finding more people at Swiggy, at Unacademy, who are running growth and trying to get them in. That's the way for us to share.
Done deal, I think. One series on that. I think we can start off with the. I think today, actually, what you shared was really good. The steps followed by how you applied it. That's exactly why I think. I mean, that's exactly I think a series that we should definitely, you know, pull off. Yeah. Thanks for that idea, and we'll definitely bring something like that for sure. Um, Last two questions. I think. One thing is around the current situation. So, with COVID, are you seeing changes in consumer behavior? Anything that you can share? And yeah, I think something more specific to Hotstar, but if we can generalize it
Uh,
in general.
Shorter
Yeah,
answer,
so
I
nothing.
can't share.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So,
exactly. Nothing to do with Hotstar, but
uh,
general thoughts around.
general thoughts. So I think general thoughts. What is happening with COVID is a great opportunity, right? I think Amit was. I just saw a comment from Amit also, who's there. I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of us
Yeah.
uh, who now are going to find two things, and especially did over the last 3 months specifically. We found very cheap access to consumers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden, you had economic activity go down in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, platforms like Facebook, Google, which are your big access points to consumers, became cheaper. You had cheap access, right? A lot of ventures went out and leveraged the cheap access. They said, great, this is, if I think of my growth, I was doing a lot of things. Let me just quickly shift gears to one thing, top of the
Mm-hmm.
funnel. Let me quickly get more people in.
Mm-hmm.
And because the more people I get in, I'll park all the stuff that I was doing on the other side. And I keep hearing this, right? People said that, hey, this is not long lived, this will not sustain. This great, right? But you switch gears. You say it's an opportunity which is time bound, and I will quickly go and get more and more people, and we'll get back to doing the other stuff. We'll get back to other parts of the funnel later, right? Because
Right.
this opportunity is not going to come again. So
Correct.
even if I was trying to improve my, let us say, if I was at tech, right, and I was trying to improve my day 7 retention,
Mm.
my day 7 retention was already some percentage today, right? So the net effect of cheap acquisition with that same retention versus trying to also improve retention is I would rather just quickly acquire more. No, I'm getting that opportunity of acquiring people at like 1/6, 1/7 the cost, right? For some
Right.
people, I even know 1/20th the cost, right?
Wow.
So that was one. The
Mm.
people who capitalized on this opportunity. And this opportunity is still there. I think
Mm.
this is one big piece which will continue for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Not at the same level as it was in March or April, but
Mm-hmm.
it will be a good opportunity still for people to acquire.
Got it.
uh, Sampling, right? If you think of human behavior and if you think of the FMCG approach of how
Mm.
people, how products penetrate, right?
Yeah.
It all starts with sampling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what has happened and what is happening and what is a great time right now, even with the actual scenario not being such a great one, but if you think from a venture perspective, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
playing to it, uh, you can drive a lot of sampling, right? All of a sudden, people have opened up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And mass India, right? So not even mass. I wouldn't say mass is still opened up. Uh, a next set of consumer unlock has
Mm-hmm.
happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though it might have been, let's say, Big Basket went and got more people in,
Right.
and you were not doing that. The point is, all the people that Big Basket brought in and the new ones that came in, right? They are now going to start sampling even more, right? They are going to sample more products, right? Because they are
Mm.
getting exposed to the goodness. Let's say TikTok, forget Big Basket, it's a much smaller one.
Yeah.
TikTok grew like crazy over the last 3 to 4 months, right?
Yeah.
They were anyway growing their DAU base, MAU base month on month for the last
Mm-hmm.
2.5 years. But
Mm.
last 3 months was like a rocket ship, right? In
Right.
their
Right.
trajectory. Uh, People who are experiencing TikTok are going to start sampling more, right? Because these are all new audiences who have come onto, be using a smartphone beyond just calling it WhatsApp, right?
Yeah.
So, great opportunity for everyone to now say that, hey, I also have people who I can start getting them to sample my products. I have more and more channels. So, I think overall, COVID is for startups is a great opportunity.
Got it. Got it. Thanks for sharing that, Viv. Bunch of questions around B2B, enterprise, PM, career. So I'll do one thing. I'll share those questions with you separately in case you could, whenever you have some time, tweet out these, or if you can just send us a Q&A type, we could share it with them after this session. To wrap up, one interesting question, if I can just pick one from the 13 left. Um, how is your journey? I know you actively are involved with startups. So how has your journey been in angel investing? For someone who is getting started, how does one look at the risk appetite? We know that it's probably the riskiest type of investment too. Longer terms for you to get back, but insane returns in case one also clicks off. So what are your thoughts? How has your learning been so far? And if you could share anything around that.
I think I can give a very precise answer to this. The first answer is no, don't do it. And for various reasons. Like,
Okay.
just to qualify that answer. Uh, do it if this is something that you are not doing just for the returns, right?
Yeah.
I do it personally because this is something, as I said, investing and that entire like public market, private market, angels, all of that, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
something which is very core to me, and I just enjoy it. It's as
Mm-hmm.
good as a part of me enjoying a game.
Yep.
So that's one. Uh, Even if you then want to get those disproportionate returns, the core part of doing angel investing is banking on founders.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you have not met 1,000 founders, how will you bank on 10? It's
Correct.
the same growth funnel, right? If you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
of the last step, if your
Mm-hmm.
top of the funnel has not been huge, you probably will not be able to do a great job at it, right?
Right.
So, still, if you want to do it, what do you do? Pick your friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go with very known people,
Mm-hmm.
your own peers who you believe in,
Mm-hmm.
and in that case, go ahead. Take a 5% of your total savings bet
Mm-hmm.
on that, right? If
Wh-
you still want to bet for it.
Right. What's like not your personal, but from your knowledge in India, in the Indian ecosystem, what is like the minimum amount that you need to say invest in a startup? Is there anything
Oh,
like that?
these days, minimum amounts have become much better thanks to platforms like AngelList, Let's
The
Venture,
syndicates.
right? Syndicates.
Yeah.
So now you can participate with as little as probably even a lakh, right?
That's it.
So yeah, uh, typically it would fall in the range of 3 to 5, but
Okay.
you can start off even with a lakh, right? Some syndicates allow
Interesting.
that.
Interesting.
So that's a starting point. But again, I would
Yeah.
suggest
Cautious.
steer away
Yeah.
from it, right? Super cautious.
Right.
It is
Right.
something for people who want to go down that path only, right? Like
Got it.
I do it because I eventually want to
Right.
be building ventures that.
Right. Do you have any tips on, like you mentioned, the funnel, like meet 1,000 people, 1,000 founders so that you get to 10. So is there any process that you follow or anything that you can share, probably just to close that loop?
Just to close that one, process I follow is thanks to communities like ours and the ones this is and many more. I get a lot of inbounds.
Nice.
The process I follow is I diligently reach out and or take up interactions with
Mm-hmm.
most founders, right? Unless and until it's so rather my filter at the top of
Yeah.
the funnel level filter uh, is the founder's LinkedIn profile having some backing? And it might be a very crude filter, right? But it's a filter.
Yeah.
Does he have at least like 2 or 3 experiences where he's drawing from? Does he or she articulate what they're trying to say well?
Mm-hmm.
And if those two things are met, I will jump on a call, right?
Got it.
If you don't articulate well, no, then I
Yeah.
won't even respond.
Got it.
So the articulation needs to be good because those are again two important things. No? A founder is if you're doing a product or a service, you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be doing two things continuously. Always be closing, always be shipping.
Right.
And if you can't articulate, you can't do either of those.
Right. Right. Do you or have you seen, not you personally, but have you seen credentials be a challenge here? Do you think that plays a role?
Credentials, a challenge in terms of just getting the first
Reaching out?
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Is there a way around it? Even if there is a challenge, but is there a way around it?
so as a founder, if you're trying to
Yeah,
reach
as a
out,
founder. Yeah, when they reach out to you.
so I think the way around is it. If let's say credentials, and as I said, credential, the bar
Yeah.
is pretty low, right? The credential, the bar is that do you at least think that they have had ample experience in life?
Mm-hmm.
And even 1 or 2 years is good experience, right? For a lot of
Right.
founders.
Right.
To start being obsessive about a venture, right? Agar,
Mm-hmm.
so that is, any of the bar is low. But let's say even if you don't meet that, maybe you're a kid who is still in college, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way to beat that then is you need to do a much better job on the articulation, right?
Right.
Your articulation then needs to outdo others.
Right.
Because see, at the end, you need to understand, right, that with angels, VCs, any stage of people who invest,
Mm-hmm.
uh, their bandwidth or the number of ventures that touch them in terms of
Mm-hmm.
prospects is
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Yep.
So they will always have at least some filter, even at the top of the funnel level.
Nice. Nice. Yep. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is a skill that you can learn. It doesn't matter what your background is. That is a lot of people writing about it online. Couple of blogs out there.
Yeah,
Practice.
and I think recently, I think on the Surge series, you have Rajan and everyone talking about startup pitches, right? I think again over there also we are getting better. The
Nice.
ecosystem is getting shaped.
Nice.
Because very frankly, till about 3 years back, the quality of early stage startup pitches was very different, right, than it
Right.
is now.
Right. Right. And getting much better, right? With
Much better.
every. Got it. Got it. Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing those insights. I think it's a well-rounded discussion that we had today. A lot of insights around, growth frameworks, moved on to general questions, and we still have a couple of more. I'll shoot them out to you. But thank you so much for your time today. I think I loved, a lot of learning points. A general closing question that we do is, I think parts of it that you already covered, but I'll still ask it because I love this insight. It's called "If I knew then what I know now." So, is there anything that you would tell to, if there's anything you've learned, you've already covered bits of it, but if you could help us with that in the closing bit, anything that you've learned
No, I
through your
can
journey?
answer this. If I knew when my second startup failed,
Uh-huh.
uh, that a better outcome would be to still start up.
Uh-huh.
uh, I would have done that. And the reason
Okay.
for that is your risk appetite changes with age, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of us know disproportionate returns of a startup. I think there is also a disproportionate return on learning, right?
Right.
So after my second venture, I chose to join a venture
Mm-hmm.
and learn.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be almost 90% there, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of being as good as starting up again,
Yeah.
but still not the same, right?
Right.
And when you are 23 versus when you are 27,
Yeah.
the barrier to starting up changes, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
my shorter answer to that is pretty simple. Like, if I knew that I will not be able to, it's not as easy to start up after 27, 28, I would have done
Okay.
my third and fourth and fifth continuously.
Interesting, very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Thanks once again, Akash. I think would love chatting with you today. Thanks for all the insights, and hope this session was insightful for you guys as well. Feel free to share. We'll share a feedback form right after this. But if you liked it, do give Akash a shout out. He's active on Twitter, LinkedIn. If there's any other insights that you'd like us to bring, feel free to write to us, and we'll try. The growth idea was great. Like, try bringing out more growth case studies. That's something that we'll definitely work on. But yeah, thanks so much once again, Akash, and thanks everyone
Yeah.
for joining us
Thanks to
today.
everyone. I hope I tried to put something which was more simpler. I didn't want it to be uber high level, so I just tried to put it through a experiment design. Uh, Happy to share whatever more. Like, just reach out to me and I'll share resources. You need help with designing experiments, happy to help with that. Any,
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think someone's asking for the PPT. We'll. Is it okay
yeah,
to
yeah,
share?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll share that. I'll
So
send it
we'll get
across.
that, and we'll mail it to you guys after this session. Awesome. Thanks again, guys, and have a great week ahead. See you guys in the next
Okay,
session.
bye. See
Yeah,
you.
thanks so much.